Good morning, beautiful children, and welcome to another chapter in Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of NIMH. Yesterday, we learned that the rats didn't always live where they live now, and that they used to live by a big city, and somehow they were captured by some people wearing white coats, though they didn't understand or they didn't know who or what they were. So today's chapter is called In the Cage. I'm wondering if they will explain what is happening or what happened to the rats once they were captured. Mrs. Frisby said, "But why did they want to catch you, and how did they ever get away? How did you ever get away again?" At first, Nicodemus said, "I thought it might be because they didn't like our stealing of the food. And yet you could hardly even call it stealing because it was a waste, and all they ever did was haul it away to the city incinerator. So what harm if we ate some of it? Of course, there are people who just dislike rats, whether they're doing any harm or not." "Oh, and they dislike mice, too," said Mrs. Frisby. "True," said Nicodemus, "though not so much as rats, I think. Anyway, that wasn't the reason at all. But what the real reason was, I didn't find out for a while. As to getting away, that too didn't happen until much later. No, I was firmly caught, snared in the net of helplessness," Nicodemus continued, "and when the man who held it saw that he had 4 rats, he pulled a drawstring that closed it up. He put the net down, and he picked up another one, an empty one. He moved on to the square, leaving us to lie there. I tried gnawing my way out, but the strands were made of some kind of plastic. It was as hard as wire. The noise and movement began to die down eventually. I suppose the rats in the square had all either been caught or escaped. I heard one man call to another, 'Hey, I guess that's the lot.' Someone else was turning a light this way and that, searching for the rest of the market area. Not one rat to be seen. Ah, we could hide and wait for another wave of rats to come. There won't be another wave, not tonight, probably not for 4 or 5 nights. Word gets around, you know." "You mean they communicate?" a third voice said. "Why, you bet they communicate. And the next time they come, you can be sure that they're going to case the place carefully. We were lucky tonight. These rats hadn't bothered for years to watch what they were doing. They'd grown very careless." How many did the lab order?" Someone was turning out the lights one at a time. 5 dozen. How many have we got here?" "I think we've got about that, maybe more." "Okay, let's load up the truck." In a minute or so I felt myself being lifted up, and swinging back and forth in the net, I was carried with my 3 companions to the white truck. I had seen that truck earlier. Its back doors were open now, and it was lighted inside. I could see that it was a whole interior with a large wire cage, and into it this net was thrust. The men then opened the drawstring, and we were bumped onto the floor, which was covered in sawdust. The other nets were emptied one at a time, the same this way and that, and in a few minutes there was a good-sized crowd of us on the floor, all more or less dazed, and all of us terrified. The cage was locked, the doors clanged shut, and the lights went out. I heard the truck motor start. A second later, the floor lurched forward beneath me. We were moving. Where were we going? Where were they taking us? What was the purpose? Then in the dark I heard a voice beside me. "Nicodemus? Is that you?" It was Jenner. You can imagine how glad I was to hear him. But I was very sorry, too. "Jenner, I thought maybe you got away." "I was in the last net. I thought I saw you across the floor." "Where are we going?" "I don't know." "What's a lab?" "A laboratory." "Yes, but what is it?" "I don't know. I've just heard the word somewhere. I can't remember." "Well, I think that's where we're going, whatever it is." The truck rumbled along through the dark over the bumpy streets at first, and then at a higher speed over the smooth highway. There were no windows in the back of this truck, and so it was impossible to see where we were going. Not that I would have known anyway, never before having been more than a half dozen blocks from my own home. I think we drove for about 2 hours. but it might have been less before the truck finally slowed and turned and came to a stop. The back doors were opened again, and through the wire wall of the cage I saw that we had come to a building, a very modern-looking building of white cement and glass. It was a square building and tall, about 10 stories. Night had fallen, and most of its windows were dark, but the platform to which our truck drove us was lighted, and there were people that were waiting there for us. A door opened, and 3 men came out. One of them pushed a cart, a hand truck, piled with small wire cages. The man beside him was dressed with a heavy coat, boots, and thick leather gloves. The third man wore heavy horn-rimmed glasses and a white coat. He was obviously the leader of these men. The men from the truck, the ones who had caught us, now joined the men from the building. "Hey, how many did you get?" asked the man with the white coat. Hard to count. They kept on moving around, but I make between 60 and 70. Good, good. Any trouble? Nah, it was easy. They acted almost tame. Oh my, I hope not. I've got enough of those tame ones now. Oh, they're lively enough. And they look healthy, too. Ooh, well, let's get at them then. The man with the gloves and the boots then donned a wire-faced mask as well, and he climbed in among us. He opened a small sliding trap door at the back of our cage. A man outside held one of the small cages up to the opening, and one at a time we were pushed out into the individual little prisons. A few of the rats snarled and tried to bite. I did not, and neither did Jenner, because we knew that it was obviously futile. There was no way of escape. 63? Good work, a man from the truck said. Hey, thanks, Doc Schultz. And we were racked up on the hand truck and wheeled into the building. Dr. Schultz. I did not know it then, but I was to be his prisoner and his pupil, his student, for the next 3 years. We spent the rest of that night in a long white room. It was, in fact, a laboratory, with a lot of equipment at one end that I didn't understand at all. Bottles and shiny metal things and black boxes with wires trailing from them. But our end held only rows of cages on shelves. Each cage had a tag on them, and each separated from its neighbor by a wooden partition on both sides. Someone came around with a stack of small bottles and jars, and then they fastened them to our cage with a little pipe that led through the bars like a sipping straw. It was for us for drinking water. Then the lights were dimmed, and we were left all alone. The cage was to be my home for a long, long time. It was not uncomfortable. It had a floor of some kind of plastic, medium soft and warm to the touch, with wire walls and ceiling, so it was airy enough. Yet just the fact that it was a cage made it absolutely horrible. I, who'd always run free wherever I wanted to go, could only go 3 hops forward and 3 hops back again. And that was all. But worst was the dreadful feeling. I know that we all had it, that we were completely at the mercy of someone that we knew not at all. We were there for some purpose that we could not guess. What were these people's plan for us? As it turned out, the uncertainty itself was the worst suffering that we had to undergo. We were treated well enough, except for some very small, quick flashes of pain, which were part of our training, and we were always well fed, though the food, scientifically compiled pellets, was not what you'd call delicious. But of course we didn't know that when we arrived, and I doubt that any of us got much sleep that first night. I know I didn't. So in a way it was a relief when early the next morning the lights snapped on and Dr. Schultz entered. There were 2 other people with him, a young woman and a young man. Like him, they were dressed in white laboratory coats. He was talking to them as they entered the room, and he walked toward their cages. 3 groups, 20 for training on injection series A, 20 for training on injection series B. That will leave 23 for a control group. They get no injection at all, except to keep the test exactly even. We will prick them with the plain needle. Let's call the groups A, B, and C, C for control. Tag them and number them A1 through A20, B1 through B20, and so on and so on. And then number the cages the same way and keep each rat in the same cage throughout and make sure the diet stays the same and doesn't change at all. Whoa, doctor, when do we start the injections? Well, as soon as we're through with the tagging, we'll do that. George, you number the tags in the cages. Julie, you tie them on. I'll hold them. So the young woman's name was Julie. The young man was George. And they all put gloves on, long, tough plastic ones that came to their elbows. One by one, we were taken from our cages, held gently but firmly by Dr. Schultz, while Julie fastened around each of our necks a narrow ribbon of yellow plastic bearing a number. I learned eventually that my number was A10. They were kind, especially Julie. I remember that one rat was being tagged. She looked at it and she said, "Oh, poor little thing, he's so frightened. Look how he's trembling." "What kind of a biologist are you?" said Dr. Schultz. "The poor little thing, first of all, it's a she, not a he." When my turn came, the door of my cage slid open, sure enough, and Dr. Schultz put his gloved hand through. I cowered to the back of the cage, which was just what he had expected me to do, and he put one hand pressed against the wire wall, and then his fingers gripped my shoulders. The other hand held my head just behind the ears, and I was completely powerless. I was lifted from the cage and felt the plastic collar clipped around my neck. I was back inside the door, closed in less than a minute. The collar was not tight, but by no amount of tugging or twisting or shaking was I ever able to get it off. I watched through the wire front of my cage as the others were caught and tagged. About 6 cages down from me, on the same shelf, I saw them put a collar on Jenner. But once he was back in his cage, I could see him no longer. A little later in the morning they came around again, this time pushing a table on wheels. It was loaded with a bottle of some clear liquid, a long rack of sharp needles, and a plunger. Once more I was lifted from the cage. This time George did the holding, while Dr. Schultz fastened one of the needles to the plunger. I felt a sharp pain in my hip, and then it was over. We all got used to that, for from then on we got injections at least twice a week. What they were injecting us with and why, we did not know. Yet for 20 of us, those injections were to change our lives forever. Well, now we know a little bit more. Now we know the rats are in a laboratory, and the name of that laboratory is NIMH. But we know that they've got these rats, they're all in cages, and they're injecting some of them. They have 2 groups that they're injecting with something, and the third group is not getting injected with anything. I'm wondering what these scientists are up to. What do you think they're trying to find out? So tomorrow, I want you to think about, make a prediction. What do you think these scientists are trying to do with the rats that they captured? All right. Enjoy your reading, enjoy your listening, and make a short prediction. So by short prediction, I mean 2 or 3 sentences, not just one. 2 or 3 sentences. Make sure that you use information from the text to prove your thinking. I love you all, and I will talk to you soon. Happy Friday.